What I thought was a peaceful escape into nature turned into a nightmare I still can't explain, because what followed me out of the woods was something no one should ever see. I've always found solace in my work as a graphic designer. My small office was a quiet sanctuary, perfect for getting lost in the intricacies of design. The details had to be just right. Every project meticulously perfected. Though the work could be exhausting, the satisfaction I felt at the end of each day was always worth it. That was until one night changed everything. It was a Friday evening, and I was leaving the office later than usual. Around 7 p.m., the sky was a haunting mix of orange and purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. I had planned a quiet weekend, movies, takeout, and solitude. Nothing special. When I got home, the world outside felt calm. I parked my car in the driveway and walked into my small one-story house. I'd been living alone here for the past 3 years. It was tucked away in a peaceful, quiet area, exactly what I needed after long days spent working. As I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I was greeted by the familiar scent of my house. Something comforting after a long day. The place was dark, just as expected. I flipped on the light in the hallway and kicked off my shoes, feeling the relief of being home. I tossed my bag on the couch and headed toward the kitchen to grab a drink, but then something caught my eye. There was a faint light in the kitchen. At first, I thought it might be from the streetlights outside, but this light was far too bright for that. I had made sure to turn everything off before I left. It didn't make sense. A chill crept up my spine, and unease settled in the pit of my stomach. Maybe I had forgotten to turn off the light. After all, it had been a long day. But as I walked closer to the kitchen, the feeling of dread intensified. The light wasn't coming from the ceiling or the usual spots. It was coming from the open freezer. My heart skipped a beat. I was sure I closed it. Who would leave a freezer door open? I lived alone. No one had a key. The silence of my home, which had always been soothing, now felt suffocating, like the air itself was pressing against me. My steps were slow and deliberate as I approached the kitchen, my mind racing. When I finally reached the doorway, I saw him. A man. He stood before the open freezer, his back to me. He wore dark, filthy clothes, his hands rummaging inside as if searching for something. My breath caught in my throat. I stood frozen, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. How had he gotten in? What was he doing in my house? The question swirled in my mind, but there was no time to think. Panic surged through me, and I instinctively backed away, making sure not to make a sound. My hands trembled as I moved swiftly and silently toward my bedroom. Once inside, I locked the door behind me, the key feeling cold and heavy in my shaking hand. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears, the sound echoing in the small room. My mind spun. I had to do something. I couldn't stay trapped in fear. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, my fingers slipping on the screen as I dialed 911. My voice was barely a whisper when I spoke to the operator, panic rising with every word. "There's someone in my house," I said, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "He's in the kitchen." The minutes dragged by like hours. Every small noise, every creak of the house made me jump. I was paralyzed with fear, praying that the man wouldn't hear me. The silence was unbearable, each second thicker than the last. Finally, a faint sound of sirens reached my ears, distant but unmistakable. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, but it was soon drowned out by my own spiraling fear. What if the man heard them? What if he tried to escape? Or worse, what if he came after me? I couldn't stop the chaotic thoughts from consuming me. Then there it was, the sound of the front door crashing open, followed by heavy, purposeful footsteps. The police had arrived. I slowly unlocked the door and peeked out into the hallway. The beam of a flashlight swept across the walls as officers moved through the house. I stepped into the hallway, my body stiff with tension. "I'm here," I called out, my voice trembling. They rushed toward me, asking if I was okay, if I had seen the intruder. But all I could think of was a man in the freezer, and the cold emptiness of my home now forever marked by fear. I explained everything from the strange light in the kitchen to the man standing in front of the freezer. The officer searched every inch of the house, but he was gone. There was no sign that he'd ever been there. No fingerprints, no traces, not even a single disturbed object. They told me that burglars sometimes broke into houses looking for easy targets. But something about the situation felt completely wrong. Why had he been interested in my freezer? Why had he taken anything else? The questions haunted me, gnawing at my mind long after the police left. The next day, I installed security cameras and changed all the locks, hoping it would restore a sense of control. But the fear never truly left. Every time I came home from work, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone might be inside, waiting. The silence that once comforted me now felt suffocating, like a constant reminder of that night. I never saw the man again, but his presence lingered in my thoughts. Who was he? What did he want? The police never found him. The case went cold, but my mind never did. I still love my work, but now, coming home wasn't the same. The safety and peace I once felt in my house were gone, replaced by the haunting fear of the unknown. I was working late at the office again. It had become a regular routine for me. My name is James, and I work as an accountant at a small firm. The office was eerily quiet at night, with only the sound of my fingers tapping on the keyboard. The dim overhead lights cast long, twisted shadows on the walls, making the place feel more deserted than it should have. The silence was so thick, you could almost hear every creak of the old wooden floor. It was the kind of silence that made your skin crawl. It was Thursday night, and I had a deadline to meet. The others had left hours ago, and I was the only one still at my desk, buried in work. The clock on the wall ticked past 11:45 p.m., and I felt the weight of the day pressing down on me. My eyes were heavy, and my back ached from hours of sitting. That's when I saw it. Something moving in the corner of my eye. Just a flicker at first, but it was enough to make me stop and look up. But when I turned my head, there was nothing there. I chalked it up to my tired mind playing tricks on me and went back to my work. But the uneasy feeling didn't leave. The air seemed thicker now, suffocating. The silence pressed harder on my chest. About 15 minutes later, just as I was considering calling it a night, I heard something, a noise outside the office door. It was faint at first, like someone shuffling around in the hallway. My heart skipped a beat. I froze in place, listening intently. Then, louder this time, footsteps. I thought maybe someone had forgotten something and came back for it. But who would return at this hour? My pulse quickened as I slowly got up from my chair, moving cautiously toward the door. I pressed my ear against the cold wood, straining to hear. The footsteps stopped. Silence. I hesitated. Should I open the door? My mind screamed to stay inside, but curiosity got the better of me. Just as I reached the handle, there was a loud bang, a door slamming open, followed by a voice. Hands up. The voice was sharp, commanding. My heart jumped into my throat. The police. Why were they here? What was happening? I slowly opened the door, my hand trembling as I released the handle. 2 officers stood in the hallway, their guns drawn and pointed straight at me. The sight of the weapons made my blood run cold. My instinct was to raise my hands and surrender. "Are you alone?" one of the officers asked, his eyes scanning the office behind me. "Yes," I managed to stammer, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm the only one here." They didn't lower their guns. One of the officers stepped forward, motioning for me to step aside. "Stay where you are," he ordered. "We're here because we received a report of a break-in." My heart pounded harder. A break-in? In the office? My eyes darted around the room, expecting to see someone, an intruder lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing out of place, just the same old clutter of papers, pens, and office equipment. "I didn't hear anything," I said, my voice shaking. "Are you sure?" The second officer nodded. "We saw a man enter the building. He was seen heading toward this office." The chill that crept up my spine was immediate. I hadn't noticed anyone. I had been so engrossed in my work that I didn't hear a thing. My breath caught in my throat. Who was he? How had he gotten in without me noticing? The officer's words echoed in my head as they scanned the office, their movement slow, deliberate. The tension in the air was thick, palpable. This was no ordinary break-in, and I was terrified that the real horror hadn't even begun. The officers rushed into the office, their eyes darting around, scanning every corner of the room with methodical precision. One officer checked behind the desk, while the other moved quickly toward the small storage room in the back. I stood frozen near the doorway, my hands still raised, feeling utterly powerless. "Stay calm," one of the officers said, his voice firm but comforting as he continued his search. "We'll find him." I watched as they meticulously searched every inch of the office, opening cupboards, pulling out drawers, checking under every piece of furniture. The minutes dragged by, each second heavier than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up. All I could think about was how close the intruder had been, how he could have been watching me the entire time while I worked. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, one of the officers called out. His voice was urgent. "Over here." I jumped. The officer was crouched down near the back of the office, peering under one of the desks. I held my breath as the other officer rushed to his side. They both knelt down, their flashlights illuminating the space beneath the desk. Then I saw it, a shadow, a figure, barely visible in the darkness. My stomach churned as a realization hit me. The intruder had been here all along, hidden in plain sight, mere feet away from me. "Come out slowly," one of the officers commanded, his voice unwavering. The figure remained still at first, but then, slowly, a man crawled out from beneath the desk. His clothes were tattered, his eyes wide with fear. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his face pale and gaunt, a hollow shell of a person. As the officers pulled him to his feet and slapped the handcuffs on his wrists, I stood frozen, unable to tear my eyes away from the horror unfolding before me. The man didn't say a word. He just stared blankly ahead, his expression vacant and lifeless. The officers led him out of the office, their steps heavy with purpose. As the door clicked shut behind them, I was left standing there, utterly numb, in the aftermath of a nightmare turned real. The office felt different now. No longer the familiar place where I had spent countless late nights. It felt tainted, as if the shadows had come alive and swallowed the safety I once took for granted. I couldn't finish my work that night. I couldn't even bring myself to sit at my desk again. The thought of staying in that office for another minute, knowing what had happened just a few feet away from me, was unbearable. I gathered my things, my hands trembling as I shoved everything into my bag, and rushed out into the night. The cold air hit my face, a sharp reminder that the terror I had just experienced was no dream. But the fear didn't dissipate. It lingered in the pit of my stomach, gnawing at me. What if the police hadn't shown up when they did? What would have happened? The drive home felt like a blur, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't bring myself to work late in that office again. The memory of that man, hidden in the shadows, watching me, haunted me, and I couldn't help but wonder what else might be lurking, waiting in the dark. Airbnb cabin story. I thought I had left the city behind, seeking peace in the quiet of nature. But the cabin in the woods wasn't what I had imagined. It was supposed to be the perfect getaway. Small, cozy, nestled deep in the forest, far from the noise of urban life. I found the listing on Airbnb, and everything about it seemed perfect. The photos promised a charming wooden cabin, surrounded by towering trees. The reviews spoke highly of Mr. Bolt, the owner, praising him for his kindness. I had no reason to doubt it. The drive out took longer than expected. The road narrowed as I got deeper into the woods, the trees around me growing thicker, their branches reaching out like fingers, clawing at the sky. The light from the setting sun barely pierced through the dense canopy, casting a murky greenish glow on the winding path ahead. I could feel the air cooling as I drove, and with it, a creeping sense of isolation. But I told myself it was exactly what I needed. Peace, quiet. I pushed the unease aside. When I finally arrived, the cabin was just as it appeared in the pictures. Cozy, with a small porch and a rocking chair. Flowers grew in neat rows near the steps, offering a splash of color in the otherwise dim surroundings. It was a quaint, idyllic place. Perfect. I stepped out of the car, stretching my legs after the long drive, and inhaled the fresh, pine-scented air. It felt refreshing, even if a little too quiet. Then, Mr. Bolt appeared from behind the cabin. He was older, probably in his late 50s, with a warm smile and kindly eyes. His plaid shirt and worn straw had gave him the look of someone who had spent his life in the woods, at peace with the solitude. "You'll love it here," he said, his voice soft like the rustling leaves in the wind. "Let me show you around." Maybe it was the isolation. Maybe it was the silence. But something about the place didn't sit right with me. I followed him as he led me through the cabin, pointing out the small kitchen, the cozy living room with its crackling fireplace, and the bedroom with a large window that overlooked the forest. The place was simple but comfortable, exactly what I needed to escape. "You're welcome to call me if you need anything," he said before leaving. "I live nearby. Just let me know." I nodded, feeling grateful for his hospitality, though a small part of me couldn't shake the odd feeling that seemed to cling to the air around the cabin. As I settled in, I told myself it was just nerves. The forest was unfamiliar, but it was supposed to be relaxing. Still, as the evening deepened and the shadows grew longer, the feeling of being watched crept up on me. The windows were sealed shut, the doors locked, but I felt like I wasn't alone. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was out there, just beyond the trees, waiting. I thanked Mr. Bolt, feeling a strange sense of reassurance in his kindness. The first evening at the cabin was peaceful, almost too peaceful. I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the porch, watching the sunset. The forest was still, save for the occasional chirp of a bird and the soft rustling of leaves. The air felt crisp, the kind of fresh air that should have been calming. But as night fell, a shiver crawled up my spine. The sky darkened into a deep shade of blue, and the temperature dropped significantly. I went inside, lit a fire in the fireplace, and curled up with a book. The warmth of the flames and the crackling sound of the fire were comforting, or at least they should have been. But as the night wore on, I began to notice things that made me uneasy. The cabin creaked and groaned as if it were alive, shifting with the wind. Outside, the wind howled, causing the windows to rattle. Shadows seemed to dance across the walls, flickering with the movement of the firelight. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the unease stayed with me, growing like a presence in the room. The next morning, I woke up early, eager to explore the forest. The woods were dense with tall, towering trees that blocked out most of the sunlight, creating an eerie, dim atmosphere. I followed a narrow path deeper into the forest, the ground soft underfoot, covered by a thick layer of fallen leaves. The only sound was the crunching of the leaves as I walked. I didn't see another soul, which wasn't surprising given how remote the cabin was. But the silence felt different today, heavier, more oppressive. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, something, anything, following me, but there was nothing. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered, as if eyes were tracking my every step. When I returned to the cabin, Mr. Bolt was tending to the flowers outside. He greeted me with the same warm smile, but something in his eyes was different. They were darker, more intense. I brushed it off, blaming my growing paranoia. That evening, I decided to relax by the fire again. As I sat in the cozy warmth of the cabin, a noise outside broke the silence. It was faint at first, a rustling sound like something or someone moving through the leaves. I froze, listening. The sound grew louder and closer, my heart pounding in my chest. It stopped right outside the door. I held my breath, waiting for something to happen, but there was nothing. After a few minutes, I convinced myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer, passing through the woods. I went to bed, trying to shake the feeling of unease that had settled deep in my chest. But in the middle of the night, I woke to the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, they moved down the hallway toward my bedroom. My heart hammered in my chest as I lay frozen under the covers, terrified to move. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. The door knob turned slowly, the soft click sending a jolt of panic through me. Then, the door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was Mr. Bolt, but something was horribly wrong. His kind eyes were gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying stare. His face seemed twisted, as if two different personalities were battling for control. One side of his face still looked like the man I had met, the kind, friendly Mr. Bolt, but the other side was distorted, angry, and menacing. His features were sharp, twisted into something far more sinister. I realized with a sickening dread that I was trapped in this remote cabin with him. He didn't speak. He just stood there, staring at me, his gaze cold and unblinking. I was paralyzed with fear, my mind racing with thoughts of how to escape, but my body refused to move. The seconds dragged on like hours. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he turned and walked away. His footsteps echoed in the hallway as they faded into the distance. I waited until I was certain he was gone before I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking violently. I dialed the police, struggling to explain where I was and what had just happened. The police arrived quickly, considering how far the cabin was from town. They found Mr. Bolt hiding in the woods, deep among the trees. When they arrested him, they discovered that he had a history of mental illness. For years, he had been living in the woods, pretending to be different people. The kind Mr. Bolt was just one of his many personalities. The others were far more dangerous. As I drove away from the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that still clung to me. The cabin, the woods, and Mr. Bolt. Everything felt like a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. But it was real, and the twisted face of the man who had seemed so kind would haunt me forever. I thought I could escape it all by camping alone in a remote forest. I needed peace. I had been working tirelessly and thought the silence of nature would clear my mind. So I packed my gear and headed to a forest I'd heard about from a friend. It was far from the city, a place few knew about, the perfect spot for solitude. When I arrived, the sun was still high in the sky. The trees were towering and thick, their leaves creating a dense canopy above me. The air was crisp and clean, and the distant sound of birds singing echoed through the forest. A small creek ran nearby, its soft gurgling the only other sound, soothing and calm. I found a perfect spot near the creek to set up my camp, surrounded by tall pines. Everything seemed perfect, like it was meant to be, but there was something unsettling about the stillness. It felt too quiet, as if the forest was holding its breath. Every step I took echoed, too loud in the unnatural silence. The deeper I ventured, the more I felt like I was being drawn into something I couldn't quite see, something that was watching me. I pitched my tent, set up a small fire, and sat down to enjoy the view. As the sun began to set, the forest transformed into a different world. The sky turned vivid shades of orange and pink, and the air grew cooler. I lit the fire and cooked a simple meal, savoring the warmth of flames against the chill creeping in. As night fully settled, the stars began to appear, twinkling brightly above the treetops, almost as if they were watching me. It was a perfect night. The forest was quiet and still, and I felt completely at ease being alone in the wilderness. After dinner, I sat by the fire, the comforting crackling sounds filling the silence around me. The crickets were chirping, and every now and then I could hear the rustle of leaves as small animals moved through the underbrush. The night felt peaceful, just the way I liked it. Eventually, I decided to turn in. I put out the fire, crawled into my tent, and wrapped myself in my sleeping bag. The cool night air seeped to the fabric of the tent, but I was warm and comfortable inside. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by the sound of voices outside my tent. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I realized the voices were real. My heart started to race as I lay perfectly. I felt a cold sweat forming on my forehead. Who were these men? What did they want? I stayed as quiet as possible, barely breathing, praying they'd go away. "I think we should just kill him," the first man said, his voice cold and emotionless. "It's easier, and no one will find him out here." My blood ran cold. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were talking about killing me. My mind raced, frantic, trying to figure out what to do. Should I run? Should I try to scare them off? I didn't know if they were armed, and the thought of running into the unknown darkness made my stomach turn. "No," the second man said firmly, his voice laced with tension. "We're not killing anyone tonight. We'll find someone else, someone easier. Let's just leave him alone." For a moment, there was silence. I held my breath, my heart hammering in my chest, too loud in my ears. The sound of my heartbeat was deafening in the stillness of the night. "Fine," the first man finally said, his voice filled with frustration. But if we don't find anyone else, we're coming back. I heard their footsteps move away, the sound of their boots crunching the leaves fading into the distance. I stayed perfectly still, waiting for what felt like hours until I was sure they were gone. My mind was spinning with fear, but I forced myself to stay calm. I waited a little longer, still frozen in my tent. The only sounds I could hear now were the rustling of the leaves in the breeze and the soft flow of the creek nearby. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat there in the darkness, listening, my mind replaying their conversation over and over. What if they came back? What if they found someone else? What if that someone else was me? As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I quickly packed up my camp. I didn't want to stay in that forest another minute. The place that had once felt peaceful now seemed like a trap, a deadly maze of trees closing in around me. I hurried to my car, my hands shaking as I threw my gear into the back seat. Every sound, every rustle of the leaves made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see those men watching me from the shadows. When I finally reached my car, I slammed the door shut behind me, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. I started the engine and sped away from the forest, not stopping until I was miles down the road, back on the main highway. Even then, the memory of those men's voices, their cold fret, haunted me. I knew I would never look at the forest the same way again. The carnival had always been my escape. As a young boy, it was a place of wonder. Bright lights, laughter, music, and the sweet smell of cotton candy. It was full of excitement and energy, a place where time seemed to stand still. I worked at the game booths, where people lined up to test their luck. My job was simple: hand out prizes, collect tickets, and sometimes show customers how to play. The games were the same every night: ring toss, shooting hoops, knocking down pins. It was routine, but there was something about the carnival that always held my attention. The flashing lights, the deep music, the crowd of people all there for one reason: to escape. It was always busiest at dusk, the sky turning shades of pink and orange, the carnival lights glowing brighter as night fell. But that night, something felt different. The air felt heavy, as if something was about to change. The carnival was my escape from a mundane world. As a young boy, I found excitement in the flashing lights, the loud music, and the laughter that filled the air. The sweet scent of cotton candy lingered around the booths, and the hum of the rides added to the thrill of the place. The atmosphere was always lively, colorful, and full of energy. I worked at the game booths, handing out prizes, collecting tickets, and occasionally showing a customer how to play. The games were simple: ring toss, shooting hoops, knocking down cans. Nothing extraordinary, but it was enough to make people smile and watching their eyes light up when they won something. A stuffed bear, a shiny toy, made it all worth it. But as the night stretched on, something began to change. The bright, cheerful atmosphere of the carnival shifted. The shadows grew longer, creeping across the grass, and the noise faded into a low, unsettling murmur. The people were still laughing and cheering, but it felt different now, like the carnival had two personalities. By day, it was a bright, exciting place. By night, it was dark, eerie, and haunted by something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was a late evening when I first noticed him. He was standing near the edge of the carnival, just outside the circle of lights. He was tall, thin, with his face hidden in the shadows. He didn't join the crowd, didn't play any games or ride the rides. He just stood there, watching. I tried to ignore him at first. After all, people come to the carnival for all sorts of reasons. Maybe he was just shy or waiting for someone. But as the night went on, I kept seeing him. No matter where I was, whether I was at the ring toss booth, helping a kid with a dart game, or taking a break by the food stands, there he was, always lurking in the shadows. His eyes never left me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was following me. The prickle of unease spread across my skin every time I caught sight of him. The carnival began to close as the night wore on. The lights dimmed one by one, and the music faded into the background, leaving only the sound of the wind and the occasional distant laughter. The crowd thinned, and the once lively place became hauntingly silent. I packed up my booth, trying to keep my hand from shaking, but my mind kept returning to the man. He was still there, standing just outside the last few lights, his presence as unnerving as ever. I told myself I was being silly. It was just my imagination, playing tricks on me. I hurried through my work, eager to leave, to escape the carnival and the man watching me. When I walked toward the exit, I glanced back one last time. He was gone. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. When I turned around, he was standing just a few feet away, his face still hidden in the shadows. I could feel his eyes on me, cold, unblinking. My heart raced, and the urge to scream surged through me, but I couldn't move. My legs felt heavy, like they were made of lead. I stood frozen, staring at him as he slowly stepped closer. His movements were deliberate, unnervingly calm, like he knew he had all the time in the world. I didn't know what he wanted, but I knew I didn't want to find out. Finally, my legs obeyed. I turned and ran, not daring to look back, afraid to see if he was following me. My breath came in short, panic gasps as I sprinted through the empty carnival. The sounds of my feet pounding against the pavement echoed in the silence. I reached the main road, the carnival lights now a distant memory. I stopped, doubled over, trying to catch my breath. I was safe, far away from the carnival, far away from a man. But the fear still clung to me, making my hands tremble and my stomach twist in knots. I walked home that night, the darkness around me feeling heavier than ever. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. Every shadow seemed to conceal something sinister. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him following me, but the road was empty. I was alone. When I finally reached home, I locked the door behind me, checking it twice to make sure it was secure. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I didn't want to sound crazy. Didn't want to admit that I had been scared by a man who might have been nothing more than a carnival goer. But deep down, I knew he wasn't. He was something else, something that didn't belong in the bright, happy world of the carnival. The next day, I went back to work, trying to push the memory of the man out of my mind. But the carnival didn't feel the same. The colors were muted, the music was quieter, and the shadows seemed darker, more oppressive. I kept looking for him, expecting to see him standing in the same spot, watching me. But he was gone. The carnival packed up and moved on to the next town a few days later. I left with it, but the memory of that night stayed with me. I never saw the man again, but even now, years later, I can still feel his eyes on me, cold and unblinking, following me through the shadows of the carnival. And I still haven't told anyone. Some things are better left unsaid. In 2019, my grandmother became very sick. She had always been healthy, full of life, but now she was in the hospital, and the doctors said she might not make it. It was a hard time for my family. We all loved Grandma so much. The thought of losing my grandmother was too painful to even imagine. She had always been the cornerstone of our family, strong, full of life, but now she was lying in a hospital bed, the doctors saying she might not make it. It was a hard time for all of us. We love her so much. One evening, my parents decided to visit her. She wasn't doing well, and they wanted to spend as much time with her as possible. They asked if I want to come with them, but the thought of seeing her like that filled me with dread. So I told them I would stay home. They didn't argue. They knew how I felt. They promised they wouldn't be gone long. Before they left, my mom gave me a tight hug and told me to lock all the doors and windows. "We'll be back soon," she said. "Call us if you need anything." As soon as they left, the house fell into an unnatural silence, the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a heavy blanket. It made my skin crawl. I tried to push the uneasy feeling away, telling myself I was just being overly sensitive. So I decided to watch a movie to distract myself. I grabbed a blanket and settled into the couch, choosing a movie I had seen 100 times before. Something light, funny, just what I needed to forget about everything, even if just for a while. At first, I felt better. The familiar scenes played out, and I even laughed at the jokes. But then, halfway through the movie, something strange happened. It was a feeling I couldn't explain, but it made my heart race. I felt like something wasn't right. At first, I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just paranoia from being alone in the house. But the feeling didn't go away. It only grew stronger, like a weight pressing down on me. It felt as though someone was watching me. I glanced around the room, but everything appeared normal. The doors were locked, the windows closed. I tried to focus back on the movie, but I couldn't. Then out of nowhere, I heard a noise. It was faint, like a whisper or a rustle. The sound seemed to come from right beneath me. My heart skipped a beat as I froze, straining to listen. The noise was coming from under the couch. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, my body tensing. I leaned forward, my mind racing. Was it just my imagination? Was I hearing things? The space beneath the couch was dark, and for a moment, I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. But then my eyes adjusted to shadows, and I saw it. Movement. Something. Someone was under the couch. I gasped, my breath catching in my throat. My heart pounded in my chest, and panic surged through me. Who was under there? How did they get in? I had locked every door and window. There was no time to think. I jumped off the couch, my legs shaking. I bolted toward the front door, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the lock. My breath was ragged, but I managed to open the door. I ran out of the house, not caring about anything except getting away from whatever, or whoever, was inside. I ran straight to my neighbor's house, my legs burning with the effort, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I pounded on the door, praying someone would be home. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open, and Mrs. Green, my elderly neighbor, appeared. "What's wrong, dear?" she asked, concern written all over her face. "There's someone in my house," I blurted out, unable to keep the fear out of my voice. Her eyes widened, and she quickly ushered me inside, locking the door behind us. She immediately called the police. As we waited for them to arrive, she tried to calm me down, but my mind was reeling. I couldn't stop thinking about the figure under the couch. The police arrived quickly, their movements swift and professional. They searched the house top to bottom while I stayed at Mrs. Green's, watching from the window. I could see the flashlights moving through the dark house, but after what seemed like hours, they came back with unsettling news. They didn't find anyone. The man under the couch was gone. There were no signs of a break-in, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The officers assured me that the house was secure, but I could tell they were as confused as I was. They didn't know how he'd gotten in or where he had gone. My parents came home soon after the police left. They were shocked and terrified when they heard what had happened. My mom hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes, while my dad spoke with the officers, trying to make sense of it all, but there were no answers. The man's intentions, his identity, remained a mystery. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every small noise made me jump. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside set my heart racing. I kept thinking about the man under the couch. Who was he? What did he want? The questions haunted me, and the fact that I would never have answers made it worse. I couldn't stay home alone for a long time after that. I double-checked the locks on every door and window, even when I was inside. The memory of that night still lingers in the back of my mind, a reminder that sometimes the scariest things are the ones you can't explain. It was 2020 when I decided to take a break from my busy life, needing a few days alone to clear my head. I packed my RV with everything I would need, food, clothes, and some supplies, and drove deep into the forest. The air was cool, and the tall trees loomed around me, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. It felt like the perfect place to unwind, to escape the noise of the world. The forest was peaceful, and I thought that a few days here would do me good. I found a secluded spot, quiet and far away from any other campers. I parked my RV in a small clearing where the trees formed a natural wall around me, blocking out the rest of the world. The sky above was painted in shades of orange and pink as the sun set, casting a warm glow over the scene. I set up a small fire outside, cooked some dinner, and enjoyed the evening sounds of forest. The rustling of leaves, the chirping of crickets, and the distant hoot of an owl. Everything felt calming and perfect. As the night deepened, I put out the fire and went inside the RV. The interior was cozy with a small bed, a table, and a few chairs. I locked the door and drew the curtains, shutting out the dark forest. The only light came from a small lamp on the table. I changed into my pajamas, climbed into bed, and wrapped myself in a warm blanket. I felt safe inside the RV, with the thick metal walls protecting me from whatever was out there in the woods. The night should have been peaceful, but it wasn't. It was just after midnight when I first heard it. A soft knock on the window beside my bed. I froze. My heart suddenly raced, and I sat up in bed, listening carefully. The knock was gentle, almost like someone tapping with their fingers, but it was loud enough to wake me up. I hesitated, unsure what to do. Was it a branch tapping against the window, or was it something else? Slowly, I got out of bed and walked to the window. I pulled the curtain back just a little, enough to peek outside. There was nothing there, just the dark trees, standing still under the pale moonlight. I let out a sigh of relief, thinking I must have imagined it. I closed the curtain and went back to bed, trying to calm my racing heart. But sleep didn't come easily. I lay there staring at the ceiling, straining to catch any sound. Minutes passed, maybe an hour? I wasn't sure. But just as I was beginning to drift off, I heard it again, the same soft knock on the window. This time, there was something else, a low, faint crying. At first, it sounded distant, as if it were coming from far away, but then it grew louder, closer. The sound was eerie, full of sorrow, and it sent a chill down my spine. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. The crying was like nothing I had ever heard. It was soft, sorrowful, as though someone was in deep pain. I couldn't ignore it. I had to see what was happening. I got out of bed and walked back to the window, my hands trembling. I pulled the curtain back slowly, my eyes wide with fear. What I saw made my blood run cold. Outside the window, just a few feet away, stood a shadowy figure. It was tall, thin, with long, stringy hair hanging over its face. The figure was barely visible in the darkness, but its eyes, those eyes, were large and glowing white, staring straight at me. They were the most terrifying eyes I had ever seen. Wide open, unblinking, and filled with something I couldn't understand. Anger? Hatred? I couldn't tell. But whatever it was, it made my skin crawl. I backed away from the window, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me, the crying growing louder and more intense. I felt my legs go weak. I had no idea what to do. My mind raced and panic set in. Should I run? Should I hide? Should I call for help? But deep down, I knew there was only one thing I could do. I rushed to front of the RV, my hands shaking as I grabbed the keys. My fingers were numb with fear, but I finally managed to turn the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the RV into gear, speeding out of the clearing and onto the narrow forest road. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The RV lurched forward, the tires kicking up dirt and gravel as I drove as fast as I could. The headlights cut through the dark trees that seemed to close in around me. The road twisted and turned, but I didn't slow down. My only thought was to get out of that forest, away from whatever was following me. The RV bounced over the rough road, and I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Every turn felt like an eternity, and I could hear the sound of my own panic breathing as I drove. After what felt like hours, I finally saw the edge of the forest. The trees thinned out, and the open road stretched ahead of me. I didn't stop until I reached a small town, miles away from the forest. I pulled over the side of the road, my hands still shaking. My heart was racing, and I couldn't stop the feeling of dread that clung to me. I sat there for a long time, trying to calm down, but the memory of the glowing eyes outside the RV haunted me. Whatever that thing was, it was still out there in the woods, waiting. I've always been a practical man. I grew up in the city, surrounded by noise and people. So, when I decided to buy a farmhouse in the countryside, everyone was surprised. The idea of living in a quiet place, away from the hustle and bustle, seemed perfect. I wanted to escape the chaos, live a simple life. The farmhouse was old, but it had character. It sat on several acres of land, with tall trees surrounding it like silent guardians. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and at night, the only sounds were the wind in the trees and the occasional hoot of an owl. The The first few weeks were peaceful. I spent my days fixing up the old place, painting the walls, repairing the roof, and clearing out the overgrown garden. There was something satisfying about working with my hands, and I enjoyed the quiet evenings sitting on the porch, watching the sunset behind the hills. But then, strange things started happening. At first, I dismissed them as nothing. Old houses make noises, I told myself. They creak and groan as they settle. But soon, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. It began with small things. I would leave a tool in one room, only to find it in another. Sometimes, I'd hear footsteps upstairs when I knew I was alone in the house. They were soft, almost hesitant, but unmistakable. I'd rush upstairs, only to find nothing but silence. The footsteps would stop the moment I reached the top of the stairs, as if whatever was making them didn't want to be found. One night, I was in the kitchen, washing dishes after dinner. The farmhouse didn't have modern conveniences, so I had to heat water on the stove and use a basin. As I scrubbed a plate, I heard a faint whisper behind me. It was so soft that I thought I had imagined it, but I turned around, expecting to see someone. The kitchen was empty. The whisper came again, this time closer, almost in my ear. My heart raced. I dropped the plate, and it shattered on the floor. I stood there frozen, listening, but the whispering had stopped. The only sound was the wind outside, rattling the window panes. I told myself I was just tired, that I had been working too much. But something was in the house with me, something I couldn't see. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every rustle of the wind made me jump. The darkness seemed thicker than usual, pressing in on me from all sides. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my ears straining to catch any sound. Eventually, I must have dozed off, but I woke up to the feeling of something cold brushing against my arm. I jerked awake, sitting up in bed, but there was nothing there. The air around me felt heavy, suffocating. The next morning, I decided to ignore what had happened. I wasn't going to let fear control me. I went about my day as usual, working on the farmhouse, trying to push the events of the previous night out of my mind. But as evening fell, that uneasy feeling returned. I tried to stay busy, but the quiet of the house felt oppressive, like the walls were closing in on me. I went to bed early, hoping that sleep would come quickly, but it didn't. I lay there, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, listening to the wind outside. And then I heard it again, the whispering. This time it was louder, clearer. It was a voice, but I couldn't make out the words. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My heart raced as I sat up in bed, panic surging through me. The whispering continued, growing more insistent, like someone was trying to tell me something. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to see what was going on. I got out of bed, my hands shaking. I slowly walked down the hallway, the whispering following me, filling the air around me. It was coming from the living room. I stopped at the doorway and peered inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon through the window. But there, in the middle of the room, stood a figure. It was a shadow, darker than the darkness around it. It stood motionless, staring at me. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its eyes on me. The whispering seemed to be coming from it, though I couldn't make out the words. I wanted to run, to leave the farmhouse and never come back, but my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, my eyes locked on the shadowy figure. It didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me. The whispering grew louder, more frantic. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know what to do. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. I didn't even know if I could escape, whatever that was. The figure didn't speak. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching me, and I couldn't look away. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. It was coming from the figure. I realized it was trying to communicate with me, but I couldn't understand what it was saying. The words were twisted, warped, as if they were reaching out from a place I couldn't touch. Finally, I found the strength to move. My body moved in slow, jerky motions, but I couldn't take my eyes off the figure. The whispering followed me as I backed away down the hallway, growing fainter with each step, but still there, gnawing at my mind. I reached my bedroom and slammed the door shut, locking it behind me. My breath came in shallow gasps as I sat on the bed, my heart racing, my mind spiraling. What was happening? Was I going crazy? I didn't sleep that night. I sat in bed, staring at the door, waiting for the whispering to return. But it didn't. The house was silent. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, oppressive silence, like the calm before a storm, thick and suffocating. The feeling in the air was different now, as if the house itself was waiting for something. I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. Whatever was in this house, it didn't want me here. The walls felt like they were closing in, pressing down on me. I had to leave. The next morning, I packed a bag and left the farmhouse, never looking back. The image of the shadowy figure and the whispering voice were still fresh in my mind, tormenting me as I drove away. I didn't stop until I was far enough from that place to feel like it was behind me. A few weeks later, I sold the farmhouse. I never returned. I didn't tell the new owners what I had experienced. Who would believe me? I hardly believed it myself. Even now, years later, I can't explain what happened in that farmhouse. All I know is that something was there, something unseen and unknown, and it didn't want me there.